Hello everyone. A warm welcome back to our dedicated subscribers, and a special greeting to those joining us for the first time. You've just stepped into the perfect place for stories that will haunt your thoughts and leave you staring into the darkness, wide awake. Before we unravel today's eerie tale, share with us in the comments where you're tuning in from. Our community is growing rapidly, and it's thrilling to see just how far our reach extends. And remember, if you want to be among the first to experience our latest spine-chilling uploads, don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell. Without it, you might miss out on the very stories that will keep you up at night. Alright, let's dive into today's unsettling adventure. Story 1: The Quiet Vigil. Babysitting was a familiar endeavor for me, a predictable cadence that threaded through the otherwise tumultuous fabric of high school life. It offered a way to earn extra cash and, perhaps more importantly, provided an opportunity to observe the intricacies of domestic life in the quiet corners of my neighborhood. The Thompsons, a congenial couple with two inexhaustibly curious children, Emily and Jake, were regulars on my roster. Their spacious suburban home, a paragon of meticulously curated comfort, stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, framed by the fading hues of sunset as I arrived on a brisk Friday evening. Mrs. Thompson greeted me with her usual warm smile, her voice tinged with a palpable weariness that spoke volumes about the relentless demands of parenthood. She handed me a neatly typed list of emergency contacts and final instructions, assuring me that Emily and Jake were already tucked into bed. They usually sleep through the night, she said, her tone laced with a mix of hope and exhaustion. But if they do wake up, just give them some warm milk and read them a story. They'll settle back down. I nodded, slipping the list into my pocket as she and her husband hurried out the door, their departure punctuated by a flurry of whispered last-minute reminders. The house, now devoid of its usual bustle, settled into a serene stillness. I found solace in the quiet hum of the appliances and the rhythmic ticking of a wall clock, a lullaby of sorts that promised an uneventful evening. I sank into the plush embrace of the Thompsons' couch, a well-worn book in hand, ready to bask in the luxury of undisturbed solitude. Hours passed without incident. The house, with its soft lamplight and the occasional creak of settling floorboards, felt like a cocoon of safety. I checked on Emily and Jake periodically, peeking into their rooms to find them deep in the tranquil oblivion of childhood sleep, satisfied that all was well. I returned to the living room, the comforting weight of my book in my hands. The gentle flicker of the reading lamp cast elongated shadows across the walls, their dance a silent testament to the passage of time. It was nearing midnight when I heard a faint rattling noise, sharp and deliberate, like the sound of metal on metal. My pulse quickened as I sat up, the book slipping from my grasp. The noise emanated from the front door, its irregular rhythm jarring against the otherwise perfect quiet of the house. The Thompsons had assured me they would not return until well after midnight, and no other visitors were expected. A chill ran down my spine as I strained to listen, my senses heightened by the sudden intrusion of the unknown. I crept toward the front door, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The rattling stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to press in on me from all sides. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. There was no response, only the distant murmur of wind rustling the leaves outside and the faint hum of traffic in the distance. I pressed my ear against the door, the cool surface amplifying the quiet tension that gripped the house. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one elongated by the weight of anticipation. Just as I was about to turn away, convinced that my imagination had conjured the noise, the rattling resumed louder this time, more insistent. Panic surged through me, adrenaline sharpening my senses as I fumbled for my phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed 911, my eyes fixed on the front door. Before I could press the call button, however, the noise ceased as abruptly as it had begun. I froze, the phone clutched tightly in my hand, my breath caught in my throat. The house was silent once more, the only sound the erratic rhythm of my own shaky breathing. Had someone been trying to break in? Or was it simply a trick of the wind? I debated my next move, torn between calling the police or seeking refuge with the neighbors. The thought of leaving Emily and Jake alone, however, kept me rooted in place. With a sense of grim determination, I scrolled through my contacts and dialed Mr. Thompson's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy, but instantly alert as I relayed the events in a hushed, urgent tone. I heard the front door handle rattling. I whispered, my voice tinged with the edge of barely contained fear. But there's no one here, and you said no one was supposed to come by. Stay inside, Mr. Thompson instructed, his tone now sharp with concern. Lock all the doors and windows and keep the kids with you. I'm on my way. Relief washed over me, mingling with the residual fear that still clung to my thoughts. I hurried through the house, checking and double-checking every lock, securing each window and door against the unknown threat that lingered just beyond the walls. Emily and Jake remained blissfully unaware, their soft breaths the only sound in the otherwise tense stillness of the house. The minutes stretched interminably as I waited for Mr. Thompson's arrival, each creak of the floorboards and distant noise from outside sending my heart racing anew. The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows, a silent reminder of the unseen dangers that lurked beyond the fragile barrier of glass and wood. Finally, the piercing beams of headlights cut through the gloom, casting long shadows across the living room carpet. I rushed to the door, relief flooding through me as Mr. Thompson entered, his expression a mix of grave determination and palpable relief. "Did you see anyone?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room with a practiced intensity that spoke of a mind already working through possible scenarios. "No," I replied, my voice still shaky. But I heard them. It was unmistakable. The front door handle was definitely rattling. Mr. Thompson nodded, his jaw set in a firm line. "You did the right thing by calling," he said quietly, his tone carrying a weight of gratitude. Moments later, the police arrived, responding swiftly to Mr. Thompson's call for assistance. They conducted a thorough search of the perimeter, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they scoured every inch of the yard and surrounding areas. Despite their efforts, no signs of forced entry or lingering intruders were found. The officers assured us they would increase patrols in the neighborhood, offering a measure of reassurance that felt both comforting and insufficient. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Mr. Thompson thanked me once again for my vigilance, his voice laden with a mixture of gratitude and lingering unease. He offered to drive me home, an offer I accepted gratefully, feeling drained and yet strangely empowered by the night's events. In the days that followed, the Thompsons took immediate steps to fortify their home, installing a robust security system and implementing additional precautions to ensure their family's safety. They expressed their gratitude to me repeatedly, insisting that my actions had been commendable despite the unsettling nature of the situation. For me, however, the experience left an indelible mark, a stark reminder of the vulnerability that lies just beneath the surface of everyday life. As I continued to babysit for the Thompsons, the memory of that night lingered in the periphery of my thoughts, a sobering reminder of the thin veil that separates the familiar from the unknown. Each time I entered their home, I found myself glancing reflexively at the front door, half expecting to hear the ominous rattle of the handle once more. The ordinary had been irrevocably tainted by the shadow of fear, and though life returned to its usual rhythm, the experience remained a quiet testament to the importance of vigilance, even in the most seemingly secure of places. It wasn't just about locking doors or securing windows, it was about recognizing the fragility of our sense of safety, the precarious balance we all maintain as we navigate through a world where the unexpected can strike at any moment. For the Thompsons, their home became a fortress, their newfound caution a shield against the uncertainties of the night. And for me, the simple act of babysitting evolved into a poignant lesson in resilience, a reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to act in spite of it. Story 2, the Silver Sands Encounter. It was a stormy night when I pulled into the Silver Sands Motel, seeking refuge from the relentless rain that drummed against my car's windshield with a relentless, rhythmic persistence. I was a weary traveler, exhausted by the monotony of the road and the interminable cascade of water that obscured my view of the highway. The motel, a modest relic of a bygone era, stood solitary and unassuming against the backdrop of towering pines, its neon sign flickering erratically in the downpour, a beacon of faded nostalgia that promised shelter from the storm. The receptionist, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a weary smile that spoke of long, quiet nights behind the front desk, greeted me with a polite nod. Her demeanor was professional yet tinged with a quiet reserve, as if the years spent in the dimly lit confines of the motel had instilled in her a cautious detachment. She handed me the key to room 12, wishing me a peaceful night's rest as she peered out at the rain-swept parking lot, her gaze lingering, as if searching for something unseen in the shadows. I trudged through the rain, the icy droplets stinging my skin as I made my way to the room. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, a pervasive mustiness that seemed to cling to everything it touched. Inside, the room was dimly lit and furnished with decor that spoke of decades past: a bed draped in a floral bedspread, a small television perched precariously on a wooden stand, and a single armchair positioned next to a window streaked with raindrops. The walls were adorned with faded wallpaper, its once vibrant patterns now dulled by the passage of time. A faint smell of old cigarette smoke lingered in the air, mingling with the pervasive dampness that seemed to seep from the walls. Exhausted from the long drive, I quickly settled in for the night, grateful for the simple solace of a dry bed and the soothing lullaby of the rain drumming against the roof. Sleep came swiftly, pulling me into a deep, dreamless oblivion that was broken only by the occasional distant rumble of thunder. But then, in the quiet hours of the early morning, I was jolted awake by a faint, unfamiliar sound, a soft click, barely audible over the din of the storm. I blinked groggily, disoriented by the darkness and the unfamiliar surroundings. The digital clock on the bedside table cast a faint red glow, its numbers reading 3A.M. The witching hour, when the world seemed to hold its breath, caught between the fading echoes of the night and the first stirrings of dawn. I lay still, my senses on high alert, as I strained to listen, every muscle tensed in anticipation. There it was again, a soft scraping noise, like metal against metal, deliberate and unnerving. My heart began to pound, each beat echoing in my chest with an intensity that seemed to drown out the sound of the rain. As the noise persisted, a chilling realization settled over me: the sound was coming from the door. Someone or something was trying to unlock it from the outside. Panic surged through me, a cold, paralyzing wave that left me momentarily frozen in place. My mind raced, flitting through possibilities. Had I forgotten to lock the door? No, I distinctly remembered turning the key before settling in for the night. Fear gripped me as I fumbled for the bedside lamp, the weak light casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls, their shapes shifting and contorting in the dim glow. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept towards the door, my footsteps tentative and silent on the worn carpet. I pressed my ear against the door, listening intently as the scraping continued, slow and deliberate, as if whoever was on the other side was trying to be stealthy. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat a deafening drum that reverberated in my ears. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. There was no response, only the sound of the rain outside and the relentless scraping of metal against metal. I hesitated, torn between opening the door to confront whoever or whatever was out there and staying safely locked inside. My hand hovered over the doorknob, fingers trembling as I weighed my options. The scraping stopped abruptly, replaced by the heavy silence of the night. I stood there, the air thick with tension, as I waited for any further sign of movement. Seconds stretched into agonizing minutes, each one punctuated by the relentless pounding of my heart. Just as I was about to turn away, convinced that the intruder had gone, the scraping resumed, louder this time, more insistent, as if emboldened by my hesitation. The door rattled in its frame, the sound reverberating through the room like a distant thunderclap. Adrenaline surged through me, propelling me into action. I rushed to the bedside table, grabbing my phone and dialing the number for the front desk with shaking hands. The line rang twice before the receptionist's voice crackled through the speaker, sounding distant and distorted. "Silver Sands Motel, how can I help you?" she asked, her tone flat and weary. "It's room 12," I whispered urgently, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own racing heartbeat. "Someone's trying to get into my room." There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of rustling paper and the faint clatter of keys. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "We haven't had any guests check in tonight except for you." "Yes, I'm sure," I insisted, my voice rising with a mixture of fear and frustration. "I can hear them trying to unlock the door. Please, send someone." "I'll call the police," she replied, her tone now edged with concern. "Stay in your room and keep the door locked. Don't open it for anyone until they arrive." I hung up, the phone slipping from my grasp as I backed away from the door, my gaze fixed on the doorknob that continued to rattle intermittently. I retreated to the bed, every nerve in my body on high alert as I clutched the bedspread, my eyes darting between the door and the window. The minutes dragged on, each one a torturous eternity, as I listened to the persistent scraping, my mind conjuring images of faceless intruders lurking just beyond the thin barrier of wood. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of distant sirens pierced the night, growing steadily louder as they approached. Relief flooded through me, tempered by the lingering fear that still gripped my senses. I remained on the bed, motionless and silent, until the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. There was a loud knock on the door, followed by the authoritative voice of a police officer. "This is the police," the voice called out. "Is anyone inside?" I scrambled to the door, peering through the peephole to see two uniformed officers standing outside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I unlocked the door and opened it cautiously, my heart still pounding in my chest. The officers swept into the room, their presence a reassuring barrier against the unknown threat that had haunted me moments before. They conducted a thorough search of the motel grounds, their flashlights casting long, eerie shadows as they scoured every corner of the parking lot and surrounding area. Despite their efforts, they found no signs of forced entry or evidence of an intruder. The only footprints visible in the rain-soaked ground were my own, leading from the reception to room 12. The officers questioned the receptionist, who confirmed that no other guests had checked in that night, and no one had been seen entering the motel. As the police departed, one of the officers turned to me, his expression a mix of concern and professional detachment. "We'll keep an eye on the area tonight," he said. "If anything else happens, don't hesitate to call us. It's probably just someone messing around, but it's better to be safe." I thanked them, the words feeling hollow as they left me standing alone in the dimly lit room. The rain continued to fall outside, a relentless drumbeat that underscored the uneasy silence of the night. I locked the door once more, triple-checking the bolt before retreating to the bed, my mind racing with unanswered questions. Who had been at the door? Why had they tried to enter? And what would have happened if I hadn't woken up in time? Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. I lay awake, listening to the storm and the occasional creak of the old building as it settled in the wind. The darkness outside pressed against the windows, a tangible reminder of the unknown dangers that lurked just beyond the fragile walls of my temporary refuge. Morning came slowly, the first light of dawn seeping through the rain-streaked window as I gathered my belongings, eager to leave the Silver Sands Motel and its unsettling memories behind. At the front desk, the receptionist offered a sympathetic smile as she processed my checkout, her demeanor markedly more subdued than the night before. "I'm sorry about what happened," she said quietly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of apology and resignation. "We've never had any trouble here before. It's usually very quiet." I nodded, accepting her words with a forced smile as I handed over the room key. As I stepped out into the rain, I glanced back at the motel, a nondescript relic of the past, standing silent and solitary against the backdrop of the storm. The encounter had left an indelible mark, a lingering unease that would not easily be shaken. As I drove away, the image of the rattling doorknob haunted me, a chilling reminder of how quickly the familiar can become the sinister, and how the veil of safety we construct around ourselves can be pierced by the quiet persistence of the unknown. Story 3: The Menacing Shadows. It had been a lively evening filled with laughter, music, and the warm camaraderie of friends at a party in the heart of the city. As the night wound down, I bid farewell to my hosts and stepped out into the cool night air, the echoes of music and conversation fading behind me. The streets were dimly lit, bathed in the soft glow of street lamps that cast long, distorted shadows across the pavement. I walked with purpose, my footsteps echoing in the quiet solitude of the late hour. The city, normally bustling and vibrant, seemed to slumber peacefully under the watchful gaze of the moon. Turning a corner, I became acutely aware of a presence behind me, a faint rustling of footsteps too deliberate to be mere coincidence. Instinctively, I quickened my pace, a prickle of unease tingling at the back of my neck. A quick glance over my shoulder confirmed my suspicions. A group of men emerged from the shadows, their figures growing larger and more ominous with each step. My heart pounded as adrenaline surged through my veins, a primal instinct urging me to flee. "Hey, sweetheart, were you off to?" one of them called out, his voice slurred with alcohol and bravado. The words, laced with an unsettling mix of mockery and entitlement, sent a chill down my spine. Laughter erupted from the group, a cacophony of harsh, discordant notes that shattered the stillness of the night. I ignored them, my steps quickening as I veered off the main street, seeking the safety of more populated areas. The men followed, their footsteps echoing ominously behind me, each one a grim reminder of the threat that loomed ever closer. Panic surged through me, a visceral response to the mounting danger. I fought to keep my composure, knowing that any display of fear could embolden them further. The city, usually a haven of familiarity, now felt alien and hostile, its alleys and corners concealing unseen threats. I cursed myself for not arranging a ride home, for underestimating the dangers that lurked in the shadows of the night. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew I had to stay composed, to find a way out of this precarious situation without drawing undue attention. "Come on, don't be like that," another voice chimed in, closer now, the words dripping with a toxic blend of mockery and menace. "We just want to talk, sweetheart." Their voices closed in, their taunts growing bolder as the distance between us shrank. I dared not look back, focusing instead on navigating the labyrinthine streets, my eyes scanning desperately for signs of life: a lit storefront, a passing car, anything that could offer refuge from the encroaching darkness. As I turned another corner, hope flared momentarily, a distant glow of neon lights ahead, marking the entrance to a late-night diner. Summoning every ounce of courage, I quickened my pace, the promise of safety spurring me forward. The footsteps behind me grew louder, more insistent, as if sensing my intent to escape. My breath came in ragged gasps, the cold air stinging my lungs as I sprinted towards the diner, praying that the sanctuary I sought lay just beyond the door. I burst through the entrance, the door chime ringing softly in the quiet of the diner, a fragile barrier against the men who lingered outside. The warm glow of the diner's interior was a stark contrast to the threatening shadows that clung to the streets outside. I glanced back through the glass door, my eyes scanning the parking lot for any sign of my pursuers. They had stopped at the edge of the lot, their figures obscured by the dim light and the lingering fog of the night. Relief washed over me, mingled with a lingering fear that refused to dissipate. Inside, the diner was a sanctuary, a haven of warmth and familiarity amidst the uncertainty of the night. I approached the counter, my hands trembling as I dialed the police, my voice low and urgent as I explained the harrowing ordeal that had unfolded on my walk home. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, urging me to stay inside until they arrived. I complied, taking refuge in a corner booth where I could keep watch on the entrance, my heart still racing with the lingering adrenaline of the chase. The minutes stretched into eternity as I waited, every passing moment weighed down by the fear of what might have been had I not found sanctuary in the diner. I glanced around the small space, taking in the worn leather booths, the vintage jukebox humming softly in the corner, and the handful of late-night patrons who paid me little mind. Their indifference was a comfort, a reminder that normalcy still existed beyond the confines of my immediate terror. Finally, the reassuring sight of flashing lights and the sound of sirens pierced the night. Police officers entered the diner, their presence a comforting reassurance of safety restored. I recounted the events, describing the men who had followed me, their faces etched in my memory with chilling clarity. The officers listened attentively, their expressions serious as they took my statement, the glow of their flashlights reflecting off the polished surfaces of the diner. Outside, the officers dispersed, their flashlights cutting through the darkness in pursuit of the men who had vanished into the night. I watched from the safety of the diner, my eyes tracking their movements as they scoured the area, their voices crackling over the radio with brief, clipped-up updates. I prayed for their swift apprehension, for justice to prevail against those who had threatened my safety and peace of mind. As dawn broke, casting a pale glow over the city, an officer escorted me back to my apartment, ensuring my safe return home. The streets, now bathed in the soft light of morning, felt less menacing, their familiar contours a stark contrast to the shadows that had concealed danger just hours before. The city, once again bustling with the early stirrings of life, seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief as the threat of the night receded. Yet the incident left an indelible mark, a reminder of the vulnerability that lurks in the quiet corners of our world, where safety is never guaranteed and the line between security and peril blurs under the cover of darkness. I resolved to be more vigilant, to trust my instincts and seek safety in numbers, to never again underestimate the risks that lurked in the anonymity of city streets at night. The memory of the men's taunts and the echo of their footsteps served as a sobering testament to the fragility of safety and the resilience required to navigate the shadows. In the weeks that followed, news of arrests brought a measure of closure, though the memory of that fateful night lingered a cautionary tale of resilience and vigilance in the face of danger, a testament to the strength found in seeking help and standing against fear. The city, with all its charm and vibrancy, had revealed a darker side that night, a reminder that even the most familiar surroundings can harbor unseen threats. I returned to my usual routines, but with a heightened sense of awareness that colored every decision. The walk home from late-night gatherings was now a carefully calculated route, well lit and populated, with frequent checks over my shoulder. My keys, once casually tossed in my bag, now remained clenched in my hand, a makeshift weapon and a symbol of the precautionary steps that had become second nature. Friends became allies, and every invitation was weighed against the risks of navigating the city alone after dark. The city, in its duality, was both a beloved home and a landscape of hidden perils. It was a place where dreams were pursued and ambitions realized, but also where the shadows could conceal malevolent intentions. My encounter that night had stripped away a layer of naivety, replacing it with a cautious vigilance that would serve me in the years to come. Yet, amid the fear and the unease, there was also a quiet empowerment, a realization that, in seeking refuge and calling for help, I had taken control of my fate. The neon glow of the diner, the warm hum of its lights, and the comforting presence of strangers who simply carried on with their own lives became symbols of resilience and community. They were reminders that even in moments of fear, there were spaces where safety could be found, where the simple act of stepping through a door could mean the difference between vulnerability and protection. And so as I continued to navigate the city streets, I carried with me the lessons of that night, a steadfast determination to remain vigilant, to trust in the small sanctuaries scattered throughout the urban sprawl, and to never forget the power of a well-timed escape into the light. Story 4: The Solitude of the Campsite. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the dense woods surrounding my small campsite. Nestled in a secluded clearing among towering pines, my tent stood as a solitary beacon in the fading light. I had chosen this spot for its isolation, seeking to escape the relentless demands of daily life for a few days of peaceful solitude in nature. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures rustling leaves, distant hoots of owls, and the occasional snap of a twig under unseen paws. Yet, despite the usual cacophony, there was an unsettling stillness to the rhythm of the night, a quiet tension that settled over the woods like an invisible shroud. Determined to shake off the unease that had begun to creep into my thoughts, I busied myself with camp chores, gathering firewood and setting up a makeshift kitchen area. The warmth of the crackling fire provided a small measure of comfort, its flickering light casting familiar shadows that danced across the trees. I cooked a simple dinner over the open flames, the routine of the task easing my nerves and grounding me in the here and now. Yet, as the fire died down and I settled into my sleeping bag, a lingering sense of apprehension persisted, a vague feeling that I was not as alone as I had intended to be. It was well past midnight when I was jolted awake by a faint, rhythmic sound. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks among the trees, a common occurrence in the depths of the wilderness. But as the noise persisted, I realized it was something different, a soft, deliberate scraping noise, almost like someone tracing circles around my tent. My heart pounded as I lay frozen in the darkness, straining my ears against the thin canvas walls that separated me from the unknown. The sound continued, each faint scrape seeming to draw closer to where I lay. Fear clenched my chest as I debated whether to call out, unsure of who or what might be lurking just beyond the fragile barrier of my tent. The minutes stretched into an eternity, the silence between each scrape growing more oppressive with each passing moment. Abruptly, the noise ceased, leaving only the deafening quiet of the forest and the relentless thud of my racing heartbeat. Unable to bear the tension any longer, I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness as I cautiously unzipped the tent flap. The night air greeted me with a chill, the scent of pine and damp earth mingling with the sharp tang of fear that clung to my senses. I shone the light into the surrounding woods, sweeping the beam from left to right in search of any sign of movement. At first, there was nothing but the swaying branches and a carpet of fallen leaves, their rustling a soft whisper against the stillness. Then, just beyond the edge of the clearing, I saw them fresh footprints imprinted in the soft earth, encircling my campsite in a deliberate pattern. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I stepped out of the tent, the beam of my flashlight illuminating the tracks. They were large and human-like, but odd, elongated, and misshapen, as though whoever had left them had walked on tiptoe with a stride that defied natural proportions. Each print was deep, suggesting weight and purpose behind every step. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Were these tracks left by a lost hiker, curious about my camp? Or was it something more sinister, a creature lurking in the darkness, drawn by the scent of my fire and the warmth of my presence? The thought of being watched, of having my solitude breached by an unseen entity, sent a shiver down my spine. I knelt to examine the prints more closely, the flashlight's beam casting stark shadows that seemed to dance mockingly around me. The footprints continued in a wide arc around the clearing, their path unerringly consistent as they circled my tent. I followed the trail with cautious steps, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the usual nighttime chorus of crickets and distant owl calls conspicuously absent. A sudden rustling in the underbrush made me spin around, the flashlight beam catching on the silhouette of a deer as it bolted into the woods, its presence a fleeting reminder that not all things that lurk in the shadows are malevolent. As I reached the opposite side of the clearing, a glint of something caught my eye, a torn fragment of fabric snagged on a low-hanging branch. I plucked it from the tree, my fingers brushing against the rough weave of denim, frayed at the edges as if torn in haste. Its presence confirmed what I had feared: someone or something had been watching me, perhaps from the very moment I had pitched my tent. With a mixture of relief and lingering dread, I hastily packed my belongings, fueled equally by fear and curiosity. The night seemed to press in around me, the darkness suffocating in its silence, broken only by the occasional rustle in the underbrush. Every sound, every shadow felt charged with unseen eyes, watching my every move. The urge to flee, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the unsettling presence that had encircled my camp, was overpowering. Dawn broke slowly, casting a pale light over the clearing, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the dense canopy above. The footprints stood stark against the morning sun, a tangible reminder of the unknown visitor that had breached my solitude. I traced the prints with cautious steps, following their circuitous path around my abandoned campsite. As I reached the edge of the clearing, the weight of the night's events settled heavily on my shoulders, a sobering reminder of the thin line that separates safety from vulnerability in the wild. I left the clearing behind, my footsteps hurried and deliberate as I made my way back to the trailhead. The forest seemed to exhale a sigh of relief as I retreated, the tension that had gripped the woods dissipating with each step I took. I glanced back one last time, the torn fabric still clutched in my hand, a silent testament to the mystery that would remain unsolved. The footprints and the frayed denim were the only tangible evidence of an encounter that defied rational explanation, yet the memory lingered, a haunting reminder that in the depths of the wilderness, there are forces and beings that elude understanding, lurking just beyond the flickering light of our campfires. To this day, I cannot say with certainty what prowled around my camp that night. Was it a person, drawn by curiosity or malice? A creature of the forest, emboldened by the cover of darkness? Or something altogether more enigmatic, a presence that defied the boundaries of the natural world? The footprints and the torn fabric remain as the only clues, fragments of a story that will likely never be fully understood. Yet the experience left an indelible mark, a reminder that in the wilderness, we are never truly alone, that the line between observer and observed is often blurred, and that the comfort of solitude can be as fleeting as the shifting shadows of the night. As I drove away from the trailhead, dust billowing behind me on the gravel road, I glanced back one final time. The forest stood silent, a solitary sentinel in the vast wilderness, its secrets held close beneath the whispering pines. Though I knew I might never return, the memory of that haunting night would linger, a reminder that some places hold more than just memories, they hold secrets best left undisturbed. The experience had changed me, instilling a newfound respect for the unknown and a deeper appreciation for the fragile balance that exists between humanity and the untamed wild. For while the wilderness offers a refuge from the noise and chaos of daily life, it is also a realm of untold mysteries and uncharted depths. It is a place where the familiar comforts of civilization fade away, replaced by the raw, unfiltered essence of nature in its purest form. And in that rawness, in the quiet stillness of a forest at night, there lies a beauty that is both captivating and terrifying, a beauty that beckons us to explore, yet warns us to tread carefully, for the wilderness is not ours to conquer, but to coexist with in respectful harmony. And so, as I continued my journey away from the campsite, the torn fabric and the lingering sense of unease served as a poignant reminder of the lessons I had learned. The forest, with its towering pines and hidden paths, remained a place of refuge and wonder, but also of caution and reverence. For in the solitude of the woods, we are reminded of our own smallness, our own fragility in the face of forces far greater than ourselves. And it is in that recognition, that humble acknowledgement of our place in the world, that we find true peace. Story 5: The Unseen Presence. The small hotel, nestled at the edge of town, exuded an inviting charm during the day. Its quaint facade and welcoming atmosphere lured travelers seeking a quiet retreat from the relentless pace of the outside world. Yet as night fell and shadows lengthened, the hotel transformed into a place where every creak and rustle seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. I had checked into my room late in the evening, weary from a day of driving through winding roads and mist-laden valleys. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile but eyes that darted nervously toward the windows, had handed me the key with a polite nod, her demeanor tinged with a subtle, inexplicable unease. The room itself was cozy, adorned with floral wallpaper that whispered tales of a bygone era. The bed was flanked by heavy drapes, their fabric thick enough to keep out the chill of the night, but not the pervasive sense of something lurking just beyond their folds. I settled into bed, grateful for the warmth of the thick comforter against the encroaching cold that seeped through the ancient windows. Despite my weariness, sleep eluded me. The minutes ticked by, then hours, marked by the distant hoot of an owl or the occasional rustle of leaves against the window pane. Each sound seemed to grow in significance, feeding a growing sense of unease that crept in like a slow, encroaching tide. Just as I began to drift into a fitful doze, I heard a soft, rhythmic sound, like someone breathing gently outside my window. My heart quickened, a shiver running through me as the hairs on my arms stood on end. I strained to listen, hoping it was merely the wind playing tricks, but the breaths continued steady and deliberate, undeniably real. With trembling hands, I reached for the bedside lamp, hesitating for a moment before flicking it on. The room flooded with light, banishing the shadows that had seemed to gather in the corners, pressing in like watchful eyes. I threw open the curtains, expecting to confront a prankster or perhaps a curious animal. Yet the night outside was serene, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, with no sign of any living creature. The street below was empty, devoid of movement save for the occasional flicker of a passing car's headlights. Confusion mingled with a growing sense of dread, my mind struggling to reconcile the palpable presence I had felt with the emptiness that now greeted me. Had exhaustion finally caught up with me, conjuring phantom sounds from the silence? I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that my mind was simply playing tricks, but as I extinguished the lamp and settled back into bed, the breathing returned, subtle, insistent, and hauntingly real. Fear gnawed at me, a primal instinct urging me to flee or fight. Yet I remained paralyzed, caught in a web of indecision. I considered calling the front desk, but what could I say? That I heard breathing where there was no one. They would dismiss me as a paranoid traveler, another victim of the hotel's eerie charm. Hours passed in a haze of restless vigilance. Each time I convinced myself the sounds had ceased, they returned with renewed persistence, the breathing taking on a haunting quality, as though it carried a message only I could hear, a plea, a warning, or perhaps something more sinister. Dawn broke reluctantly, casting feeble light through the window blinds, and I ventured outside, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the room. The hotel staff greeted me with polite smiles, their expressions betraying no hint of the night's ordeal that had left me shaken and sleepless. I spent the day exploring the quaint town, seeking solace in its familiar streets and bustling cafes. Yet a sense of unease lingered like a shadow at my heels. I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen had watched me from the darkness, its presence palpable yet invisible. That evening, I returned to the hotel with trepidation, half expecting the breathing to resume its haunting melody. The receptionist greeted me warmly, her demeanor unchanged from the night before. I hesitated, on the verge of recounting my experience, but the words caught in my throat. Back in my room, I locked the door and drew the curtains tightly shut, determined to keep whatever lurked beyond the window pane at bay. I paced the floor, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Every sound, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of curtains, sent a shiver down my spine. As night descended once more, I resolved to confront whatever lurked outside. With trembling hands, I pulled back the curtain, half expecting to find a face pressed against the glass. Yet the view was empty, the night serene and undisturbed. I leaned closer, straining to hear any hint of the elusive breathing. Silence greeted me, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the faint rustle of leaves. Had I imagined it all a trick of tired senses and overactive imagination? Just as doubt began to cloud my thoughts, a soft exhale echoed through the room, chilling me to the bone. I turned, heart racing, to find nothing but empty space behind me. Panic surged, an irrational fear gripping me in its icy embrace. In a desperate bid for sanity, I grabbed my belongings and fled the room, leaving behind the eerie breathing that had haunted me through the night. The receptionist looked up in surprise as I stumbled past, my mind reeling with unanswered questions and unspoken fears. Outside, the cool night air revived me, clearing the fog of uncertainty that had clouded my thoughts. I hurried away from the hotel, haunted by the inexplicable encounter that defied logic and reason. To this day, I wonder what whispered through the darkness that night. Was it a lingering spirit, a trick of the mind, or something far more sinister lurking in the shadows of that small, unsuspecting hotel? The memory lingers, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates the known from the unknown, the tangible from the intangible. The hotel, with its quaint charm and welcoming facade, had concealed a presence that defied explanation, a presence that seemed to watch and wait, existing in the periphery of the senses, just beyond the reach of reason. In the weeks that followed, I found myself replaying the events of that night, seeking answers in the quiet moments before sleep, when the mind is most vulnerable to the encroachments of doubt and fear. Each breath, each whisper of wind against the window, became a reminder of the unseen forces that occasionally pierce the fabric of our perceived reality. I sought solace in rational explanations, convincing myself that exhaustion and the unfamiliar surroundings had conspired to create the perfect conditions for auditory hallucinations. But deep down, a lingering unease persisted, an inexplicable certainty that I had not been alone. I returned to my routines with a heightened awareness of the spaces I inhabited, a newfound vigilance that colored my perception of every creak and whisper. The world, once a place of concrete certainties, now seemed to hold secrets in its quiet corners, mysteries that defied easy categorization. I became attuned to the subtleties of sound, the faintest shifts in the air that signaled the presence of the unseen. In crowded rooms and empty corridors alike, I listened for the telltale rhythm of breaths that didn't belong, the whispers that carried no discernible source. The hotel, with its unassuming presence on the outskirts of town, remained a place of curiosity and dread. I avoided its vicinity, steering clear of the street where it stood, as if by doing so I could distance myself from the memory of the night I spent there. Friends and colleagues laughed at my reluctance, dismissing my fears as the overactive imagination of a sleep-deprived traveler. I smiled along, feigning nonchalance, but the truth was more complex, a tangled web of fear, curiosity, and a deep-seated recognition of the fragility of our grasp on reality. For in that room, in the quiet hours of the night, I had glimpsed the edges of something vast and unknowable, a presence that defied the boundaries of logic and reason. It was a reminder that the world is not as neatly contained as we might wish to believe, that beyond the veneer of normalcy lies a landscape of possibilities that stretch beyond the limits of human comprehension. And though I may never fully understand what I experienced in that small hotel, the memory serves as a testament to the mysteries that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the unsuspecting traveler to cross their path. Perhaps it is the very uncertainty that keeps us grounded, the acknowledgement that there are forces at play that we cannot control or fully understand. It is this recognition that tempers our arrogance and fosters humility in the face of the unknown. And so, as I continue to navigate the familiar paths of my daily life, I carry with me the quiet lesson of that night, a reminder that sometimes the most profound encounters occur in the spaces between waking and dreaming, in the silence of an empty room, and in the soft, rhythmic breaths of an unseen presence that lingers just out of sight. Story 6: The Haunting at the Remote Cabin. The cabin, nestled deep in the woods, was a refuge from the noise and clamor of everyday life. Surrounded by towering pines and the serene stillness of a nearby lake, it seemed the perfect escape for an avid hiker and lover of solitude like myself. The moment I set foot on its weathered wooden porch, I could feel the weight of the outside world lifting, replaced by the comforting embrace of nature's quiet persistence. Little did I know, however, that this tranquil retreat would soon transform into a chilling tale that would be etched into my memory forever. Arriving late on a crisp Friday afternoon, I unlocked the door and stepped into the dimly lit interior. The air inside was heavy with the scent of pine and the faint mustiness of aged wood, dust motes dancing in the slanting rays of the setting sun that filtered through the windows. The cabin was rustic yet charming, with its stone fireplace, cozy armchairs, and an old wooden dining table that looked as though it had hosted countless meals over the years. After unpacking my essentials, I decided to explore the surrounding area before darkness fell, the woods beckoning with promises of secrets waiting to be discovered beneath their canopy. I wandered along a narrow trail that wound through the trees, relishing the crunch of leaves underfoot and the whisper of wind through the branches. As twilight approached, I retraced my steps back to the cabin, the growing shadows lending the woods an eerie, unfamiliar quality. That night, after a simple dinner of canned soup heated over the fire, I settled into bed, lulled by the crackling of embers and the distant hoot of an owl. Just as sleep began to claim me, a faint noise pulled me back to wakefulness, a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across wood. My heart quickened, and I sat up, straining my ears against the thick silence that now enveloped the cabin. I listened intently, each creak of the settling timber amplified in the quiet of the night. Convinced it was my imagination, I dismissed the sound and lay back down, willing myself to relax. But as the minutes dragged on, the unease lingered, settling over me like a heavy blanket. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the lake shimmering in the early light like a mirror reflecting the cloudless sky above. Determined to shake off the unease from the night before, I brewed a strong cup of coffee and stepped outside onto the porch. Nature seemed peaceful, untouched by the strange disturbance that had unsettled my sleep. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed something odd. A window on the side of the cabin, obscured by years of neglect, bore a message written in the thick layer of dust. The words were stark and chilling, "Get out, Dot." Chills raced down my spine as I approached the window, the mug slipping from my grasp and shattering on the porch. Who would write such a thing? Was it a prank, or was there someone else out here with me? I scanned the surroundings, half expecting to see someone watching from the trees, but the forest was empty save for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I hesitated, torn between curiosity and a growing sense of dread. Eventually, curiosity won out. Grabbing a rag from the kitchen, I wiped away the message, erasing the ominous words from sight. Perhaps it was an old message left by a previous visitor, a joke in poor taste, I rationalized as I tried to calm my nerves. Throughout the day, I hiked the trails, capturing photos of the stunning landscape and immersing myself in the solitude I had sought. Yet despite the beauty around me, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Several times I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind me, but the woods remained as silent and still as ever. By the time I returned to the cabin that evening, the unease had settled into my bones, a constant undercurrent to my every thought. That night, the unease settled over me like a suffocating shroud. I built up the fire in the fireplace, hoping its warmth would dispel the chill that seemed to seep into every corner of the cabin. As I sat by the crackling flames, reading by the flickering light of an old lantern, I thought I heard footsteps outside, a soft padding that stopped abruptly, as if whoever it was had realized I could hear them. My heart raced as I rose and moved to the window, peering into the darkness. Moonlight filtered through the branches, casting eerie shadows on the ground. For a moment, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Then, movement caught my eye, a fleeting shadow darting between the trees, too swift and too deliberate to be a trick of the light. Fear clenched my chest. Should I call for help? But who would hear me out here, miles from the nearest neighbor or sign of civilization? I decided to wait, hoping it was just an animal, perhaps a deer or a fox. But the fear lingered, coiling tight within me like a spring ready to snap. Eventually, exhaustion overtook my fear, and I retreated to bed, leaving the lantern burning low beside me. Sleep came fitfully, disturbed by dreams of shadowy figures and whispered warnings. Each time I woke, I listened intently for any sound outside, but the night remained quiet, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant rustle of leaves. Morning brought a mix of relief and apprehension. I packed my belongings hastily, resolving to leave the cabin behind. The beauty of the wilderness no longer held its allure. Instead, it felt like a place of secrets and unseen threats. As I drove away from the cabin, dust billowing behind me on the gravel road, I glanced back one last time. The cabin stood silent amidst the trees, a solitary sentinel in the vast wilderness. Though I knew I might never return, the memory of that haunting message in the dust would linger, a reminder that some places hold more than just memories, they hold secrets best left undisturbed. The experience had left a lasting impression, an unsettling reminder of the vulnerability of isolation. It was as if the forest itself had eyes, unseen but ever watchful, scrutinizing every move, every breath. For me, the weekend had been a sobering lesson in the thin veil that separates safety from peril, and how easily it can be pierced by forces beyond our understanding. The image of the words scrawled in dust haunted me in the days that followed. Who had written them? Why? I found myself replaying the events over and over, searching for missed clues, overlooked details that might provide answers. Each time I came up empty-handed, the mystery deepening with every passing thought. I considered reporting the incident, but to whom? And with what evidence? A dust-covered window, a broken night's sleep, the unsettling feeling of eyes in the dark. These were hardly the makings of a report worth pursuing. Instead, I chose to keep the experience to myself, a private enigma that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. It became a quiet companion, a reminder of the world's latent strangeness, of the boundaries between the seen and unseen, the known and unknown. The cabin, once a symbol of solitude and peace, had revealed a darker side, one that whispered of ancient secrets and unseen guardians, lurking just beyond the periphery of human perception. And so, I continued my hikes, my ventures into the wild, but always with a new awareness, a heightened sense of the possible, a respect for the quiet corners of the world where mysteries reside. The wilderness, in all its vast beauty and complexity, had shown me that it was not just a refuge from the chaos of daily life, but also a realm where the familiar rules did not always apply. It was a place where the boundary between reality and the unknown was blurred, where the ordinary could suddenly take on a sinister cast, and where the quietest moments could be the most profound. The message on the window had faded, but the impact remained, a subtle shift in my perception of the wild spaces I so loved. The cabin, with its aged wood and silent rooms, had become a part of a larger narrative, a story of isolation, of the thin veil between safety and danger, and of the unspoken pact we make when we venture into the unknown. It was a reminder that no matter how much we seek to escape the familiar, we carry with us the same fears, the same questions, and the same need for understanding, even in the most remote and untouched places. In the end, the cabin had given me more than I had bargained for: a weekend of reflection, of mystery, and of an unspoken dialogue with the unseen. It had reminded me that, while we may seek solitude and quiet, we are never truly alone. There are always forces at play, whether they be the subtle shifts of nature or the more enigmatic presences that defy our understanding. And in recognizing this, I found a renewed respect for the wilderness, a respect not just for its beauty and grandeur, but for the mysteries it holds, hidden in the shadows of the trees and the quiet whispers of the wind. Story 7: The Whispering Walls. It was the perfect storm of circumstances that led me to the old Victorian house at the edge of town, a place long abandoned, yet still standing with a quiet dignity amidst its weather-worn facade and sagging roof. I was an architectural photographer, always on the lookout for unique and evocative locations that told stories through their very structure. This house, with its crumbling walls and broken windows that stared blankly like the hollow eyes of a long-forgotten statue, promised exactly the kind of haunting beauty that I sought to capture. I had heard whispers of its history, a place once filled with life and laughter, now reduced to a ghostly shell where only the echoes of the past lingered. The house was shrouded in an aura of melancholy, its once grand exterior now overgrown with ivy and creeping vines that seemed to clutch at the decaying wood, as if trying to reclaim it piece by piece. I arrived on a crisp autumn morning, the chill in the air sharp enough to sting the lungs with each breath. Armed with my camera and a sense of anticipation, I stepped through the rusted gate that groaned in protest, its hinges creaking like the lament of an old soul. The yard was a tangle of weeds and brambles, the skeletal remains of what had once been a carefully tended garden. As I approached the front door, the sense of decay and abandonment was palpable, a tangible weight that hung in the air, pressing in from all sides. I pushed open the door, its heavy wood yielding with a reluctant shudder, and stepped into the dim interior. The house exhaled a musty breath, the scent of mildew and damp wood filling my nostrils. Dust motes floated in the weak shafts of sunlight that filtered through the grime-coated windows, casting faint patterns on the warped floorboards. Every step I took sent a cloud of dust spiraling into the air, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the vast, empty rooms. The walls, once adorned with elegant wallpaper, now peeled in jagged strips, exposing the bare plaster beneath like old wounds slowly unraveling with time. I began photographing the interior, each click of the shutter capturing the silent testimony of the house's slow decline. As I moved from room to room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, the sensation prickling at the back of my neck. It was as though the house itself was alive, aware of my presence and resentful of the intrusion. The air was heavy with the weight of history, every creak of the floorboards and distant groan of settling wood a reminder of the lives that had once filled these rooms. There was a strange energy to the place, a kind of quiet tension that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. I paused in what had once been the parlor, its faded elegance still discernible beneath layers of dust and neglect. A grand fireplace dominated one wall, its ornate mantel carved with intricate designs that hinted at a time when the house had been a proud and vibrant home. As I raised my camera to capture the scene, I heard it a faint whisper, so soft that at first I thought it was merely the wind stirring the loose boards outside. But then it came again, a low murmur that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, like the distant hum of a conversation just beyond the edge of comprehension. I lowered my camera, straining to listen, my pulse quickening as the whispers grew louder, though still indistinct. The sound was unsettling, a chorus of voices that overlapped and intertwined, rising and falling in a rhythm that defied logic. I turned slowly, scanning the empty room for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, only the shadows that clung stubbornly to the corners and the silent remains of the house's former grandeur. I tried to rationalize the whispers, telling myself it was the wind or the creaking of old wood, but the sounds were too deliberate, too human. Compelled by a mixture of curiosity and unease, I ventured deeper into the house, following the whispers as they ebbed and flowed, leading me through a labyrinth of narrow hallways and forgotten rooms. The deeper I went, the stronger the sense of presence became, as if the house itself was guiding me towards some hidden truth. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, though still maddeningly elusive fragments of words and half-formed sentences that slipped away before I could grasp their meaning. I found myself standing before a heavy door at the end of a narrow corridor, its wood swollen and warped with age. The whispers were loudest here, their urgent cadence seeping through the cracks around the frame. My hand hesitated on the doorknob, a cold shiver running through me as I debated whether to turn back. But the pull was irresistible, a magnetic force that seemed to draw me closer, compelling me to uncover the source of the haunting whispers. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open, the hinges protesting with a loud groan that echoed down the empty hallway. The room beyond was dark, the air thick with the scent of rot and decay. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside, casting a wavering beam of light that illuminated the dust-choked space. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with crumbling books and forgotten relics of a bygone era. And there, at the far end of the room, stood an old wooden desk, its surface cluttered with yellowed papers and a tarnished oil lamp. As I approached, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a maelstrom of disembodied voices that seemed to emanate from every corner. I reached the desk and picked up one of the papers, its surface brittle and discolored with age. The words were faded, the ink barely legible, but I could just make out the frantic scrawl of a letter, a plea for help, written in a hurried, desperate hand. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, and for a moment, I thought I could almost understand them, the fragments of their stories bleeding into the words on the page. A sense of overwhelming sadness washed over me, the voices filled with longing and despair, as if the very walls were trying to communicate their sorrows, their regrets. In that moment, I realized the house was not just a structure of wood and stone, but a vessel of memories of lives lived and lost, of joys and sorrows etched into every crevice and crack. The whispers were not malevolent, but rather the echoes of those who had once called this place home, their voices trapped in the fabric of the house, unable to move on. They were the remnants of a time long past, clinging to the physical world in a desperate bid to be remembered. I spent the next hour in a kind of trance, photographing the room and its contents, each image a tribute to the stories embedded within the walls. The whispers gradually faded, their voices growing softer and more distant until they were little more than a faint hum at the edge of perception. As I packed up my gear and prepared to leave, I paused one last time in the parlor, gazing at the grand fireplace and the faded elegance that still lingered like a ghost of the past. Outside, the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the overgrown yard. I locked the door behind me, the heavy sound reverberating through the silent house. As I walked away, I glanced back at the old Victorian, its silhouette dark against the evening sky. The whispers were gone, but their presence remained a quiet testament to the lives that had once filled its rooms, now reduced to echoes that faded with each passing day. Driving away, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of connection to the house and its forgotten stories. It was as if, in some small way, I had borne witness to the lives that had played out within its walls, and in doing so, had helped to keep their memories alive. The photos I took that day were not just images of decay and abandonment, but a chronicle of the unseen, the whispered voices of a past that refused to be silenced. The experience left me with a renewed appreciation for the quiet, often overlooked histories that linger in the spaces around us. It was a reminder that every building, every structure, carries with it the weight of the lives that have passed through its doors. And though the whispers may fade, the stories remain etched into the very fabric of the walls, waiting for someone to listen. In the weeks that followed, I found myself drawn to similar places, abandoned homes, forgotten buildings, each one a potential repository of unseen histories and whispered memories. I approached each with a newfound reverence, listening not just with my ears, but with my heart, attuned to the subtle vibrations that spoke of lives once lived. And in each place, I found echoes of the past, sometimes faint, sometimes overwhelming, but always present, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the unbreakable bond between place and person. The old Victorian house, with its whispering walls and haunted rooms, had taught me a valuable lesson that in every abandoned corner, in every silent space, there are stories waiting to be told. And it is our duty, as witnesses to these places, to listen to hear the whispers that linger just beneath the surface, and to honor the lives that have left their mark on the world, even if only in the faintest of echoes. Story 8, The Lake of Reflections. The summer cottage on the lake had been in my family for generations, a modest retreat where childhood memories intertwined with the sun-dappled waters and the whispering rustle of birch leaves. Its whitewashed exterior and faded blue shutters stood as a testament to countless summers spent basking in the warmth of the sun, fishing off the old wooden dock, and telling ghost stories by the fire. Despite its age, the cottage had always been a sanctuary of joy and peace, until that fateful summer when the lake, usually a source of comfort, took on an eerie, almost malevolent quality that defied explanation. I had arrived at the cottage alone that year, seeking a quiet refuge after the stress of a demanding job and a recent breakup. The familiar sight of the lake, its surface glittering in the afternoon sun, greeted me with the same warmth it always had. I spent the first few days enjoying the solitude, falling into the old rhythms of early morning swims and lazy afternoons reading on the dock. The lake, with its cool, clear waters, was a balm for my restless mind, offering a sense of stability amidst the chaos of my personal life. But as the days passed, I began to notice subtle changes in the atmosphere, small, almost imperceptible shifts that gnawed at the edges of my sense of calm. The lake, once a shimmering expanse of tranquil blue, seemed to darken under the weight of unseen shadows, its waters turning an unsettling shade of murky green. On several occasions, I caught glimpses of movement just below the surface, swift, darting shapes that vanished before I could get a clear look. Fish, I told myself, though the reassurance felt hollow, more a hopeful lie than a truth. One evening, as I sat on the dock watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I noticed something odd. The lake, usually placid at this time of day, was rippling gently even though there was no breeze. The water appeared restless, as if disturbed by some invisible force beneath. A chill ran down my spine as I watched the ripples spread in concentric circles, their origins obscured by the fading light. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, blaming it on fatigue and overactive imagination. Yet, as darkness fell and the first stars began to twinkle overhead, the unease only grew. I could hear the soft lapping of water against the dock, a soothing sound that had always lulled me to sleep in the past, but tonight it felt different, ominous, almost. The cottage, usually a place of warmth and safety, seemed to press in on me, its old wooden beams creaking as if whispering secrets in a language just beyond my comprehension. I turned in early, hoping that a good night's sleep would dispel the unsettling sensations that had begun to creep into my thoughts. But sleep did not come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the events of the day with an uneasy intensity. Just as I began to drift into a fitful slumber, I was jolted awake by a soft, rhythmic sound of faint splashing, like something moving slowly through the water. My pulse quickened as I listened, the sound growing steadily louder, more insistent. It was unmistakable something was out there, moving purposefully through the lake, its presence both deliberate and unnerving. I rose from the bed and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale, silvery light over the lake. At first, I saw nothing but the familiar outlines of trees and the gentle undulation of water. But then, as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw it a shadowy figure, barely discernible against the surface of the lake, gliding silently through the water. It moved with a fluid grace, almost as if it were part of the lake itself, its form shifting and changing with each ripple. Fear gripped me as I watched, frozen in place by the sheer strangeness of what I was witnessing. The figure continued its slow, deliberate path across the water, heading towards the dock. I strained to make out details, but the darkness obscured everything beyond the vague outline. My mind raced, cycling through possibilities: a swimmer, a large fish, or something else entirely, something that defied logical explanation. Unable to bear the tension any longer, I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped outside, the cool night air prickling my skin. I moved slowly towards the dock, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The figure was gone, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The lake was still once more, its surface smooth and undisturbed, reflecting the moonlight with an almost mocking serenity. I stood there for several minutes, scanning the water, but there was no sign of the shadowy form I had seen moments before. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had all been a dream, a product of an overactive mind coupled with the isolation of the lake. But the sense of unease lingered, a quiet tension that thrummed just beneath the surface of my thoughts. I went about my usual activities, hoping that routine would dispel the remnants of fear that clung to me like cobwebs. But the lake, once a comforting presence, now felt alien and unwelcoming, its depths concealing mysteries I was no longer eager to explore. That afternoon, while kayaking near the center of the lake, I felt it again, a presence just below the surface, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. I stopped paddling, letting the kayak drift as I peered into the water. The sunlight pierced the depths, illuminating patches of algae and drifting plant life, but there was no sign of anything unusual. Yet the feeling remained, a gnawing sense of being watched, of something ancient and unknowable lurking just beyond my sight. I returned to the cottage, shaken and frustrated by my inability to shake the feeling of dread that now tainted every interaction with the lake. That night, the splashing returned, louder and more persistent. I listened from the safety of my bed, heart racing as the sound drew closer, echoing off the walls of the cottage. I tried to ignore it, to bury my head under the covers and block out the noise, but it was no use. The splashing grew louder still, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to match the beating of my own heart. Desperation drove me to the window once more, and what I saw chilled me to the core. The figure had returned, but this time it was closer, much closer. It hovered at the edge of the dock, its form still indistinct but undeniably present. It swayed slightly, as if caught in some unseen current, its dark outline shimmering in the moonlight. I watched, transfixed, as it slowly raised what appeared to be an arm, or perhaps a fin, pointing directly towards the cottage. My blood ran cold as I realized that it was not merely floating, it was beckoning. I staggered back from the window, my mind reeling with terror. The realization that whatever it was, it wanted me to join it, sent a wave of panic crashing over me. I backed away from the window, heart pounding, the beckoning figure seared into my mind. The splashing continued, growing louder and more frantic, as if urging me to come closer. I fought the irrational urge to go outside, to step onto the dock and meet whatever waited for me in the water. Instead, I locked the doors, drawing the curtains tightly shut as if that thin barrier of fabric could protect me from the malevolent presence outside. I sat in the darkness, listening as the splashing finally subsided, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed in from all sides. The cottage, once a haven, now felt like a prison, its walls closing in around me with every passing minute. The next morning, I packed my belongings with shaking hands, eager to leave the lake and its haunting presence behind. As I loaded my car, I glanced back one last time at the water, half expecting to see the figure watching from the depths. But the lake was still, its surface reflecting the clear blue sky above, as if nothing had ever disturbed its tranquil facade. Driving away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible, something beyond the realm of human understanding. The lake, with its dark secrets and shifting shadows, had shown me a glimpse of its true nature, a place where the line between the known and the unknown blurred, where reflections on the surface concealed far more than they revealed. I never returned to the cottage after that summer. The memories of the beckoning figure, the splashing in the night, and the sense of being watched haunted me for years, resurfacing in the quiet moments when I least expected it. The lake, once a source of peace and comfort, had become a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that even the most familiar places can harbor unseen dangers, lurking just beneath the surface. To this day, I wonder what I saw that summer, and what would have happened if I had answered the call of the lake. Perhaps it was all a figment of an overworked mind, a hallucination brought on by stress and solitude. Or perhaps, somewhere beneath the placid waters of that old lake, something ancient and restless still waits, watching and waiting for someone to step too close to the edge. Whatever the truth, I knew one thing for certain: the lake, with its shimmering surface and hidden depths, would forever remain a place of mysteries best left undisturbed. Story 9: The Silent Watcher. The house sat at the end of a long, winding road, flanked by ancient oak trees whose gnarled branches twisted skyward like skeletal fingers. It was a sprawling manor, once grand and imposing, now a fading relic of a bygone era. Its stone facade, weathered by decades of harsh winds and relentless rains, exuded an air of melancholy that seemed to permeate the surrounding landscape. I had inherited the house from a distant relative, a great uncle I barely remembered, whose passing had left me the unexpected heir to his vast, neglected estate. I arrived on a drizzly afternoon, the sky a slate gray blanket that pressed down heavily, matching the somber mood of the house. Despite its dilapidated state, the manor held a certain allure, an almost magnetic pull that drew me closer, even as a sense of unease settled in my gut. It was the kind of place that seemed to have a presence all its own, as though the house itself were alive, watching with an unseen but palpable gaze. I shook off the feeling as best as I could, attributing it to the loneliness of the journey and the eerie stillness of the grounds. Story 10: The Call of the Abyss. The cliffs of Dover, with their towering white faces plunging dramatically into the churning sea below, had always fascinated me. There was something hauntingly beautiful about their stark, sheer presence, an imposing reminder of nature's raw power and the relentless passage of time. I often visited the cliffs to find solace, to escape the pressures of city life and immerse myself in the wild embrace of the wind and sea. But on that particular day, the cliffs were not a sanctuary, they were the setting of an encounter that would forever alter my perception of the natural world. The day had started like any other. I arrived at the cliffs in the early afternoon, the sun hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds that stretched endlessly across the sky. The air was cool and brisk, the wind tugging playfully at my clothes as I walked along the narrow path that skirted the edge of the precipice. Far below, the waves crashed against the rocks with a rhythmic roar, sending up plumes of white spray that glistened in the muted light. I felt at peace, the vast expanse of the ocean before me a soothing counterpoint to the chaos of my thoughts. As I walked, I noticed a figure standing at the very edge of the cliff, silhouetted against the gray sky. The person was tall and thin, their posture rigid and unnaturally still. From a distance, it was hard to tell if they were male or female, but something about their stance caught my attention, a strange, almost trance-like stillness that seemed out of place amid the ceaseless motion of the wind and waves. Curious, I continued along the path, my footsteps muffled by the soft grass underfoot. As I drew closer, I could see that the figure was a man, his clothes flapping gently in the breeze. He stood with his back to me, staring intently out to sea as if mesmerized by something far beyond the horizon. I called out a polite greeting, but he didn't respond. He remained perfectly still, his gaze locked on the distant waters, as though caught in the grip of an unseen force. An uneasy feeling prickled at the back of my neck, but I shrugged it off, assuming he was lost in thought or simply enjoying the view. I walked a bit closer, stopping a safe distance away. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I said, my voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. The man didn't acknowledge me, his posture unchanging. A sense of wrongness settled over me, a quiet alarm that set my nerves on edge. I glanced at his face, half expecting to see the familiar look of someone absorbed in the grandeur of the sea. But his expression was vacant, his eyes wide and unblinking, as if staring straight through the world in front of him. It was then that I noticed his lips moving, forming words that were lost to the wind. He was whispering something soft, repetitive, a chant of sorts. The sound, though faint, was unnerving, carrying a rhythmic quality that seemed almost hypnotic. I strained to hear, leaning slightly forward, but the wind snatched the words away before they could reach my ears. The man's whispering grew more fervent, his voice rising in a cadence that matched the surging waves below. Concerned, I took a cautious step closer, trying to make out the words. "Are you all right?" I asked, louder this time, hoping to break through whatever trance he was in. For a moment, it seemed as though he hadn't heard me. Then, slowly, he turned his head, his movements stiff and mechanical, like a puppet on frayed strings. His eyes met mine, and I recoiled. They were blank, glassy, devoid of life or recognition. His face was expressionless, a mask of serene detachment that sent a chill down my spine. As I pushed open the heavy front door, it creaked loudly, the sound echoing through the vast, empty foyer. The interior was dimly lit, with thick layers of dust covering every surface. Cobwebs clung to the corners of the ornate crown molding, and the faint scent of mildew permeated the air. Despite the disrepair, the house retained a hint of its former grandeur: marble floors, intricately carved banisters, and large, stained glass windows that cast fragmented patterns of colored light across the walls. I spent the first few hours exploring the many rooms, each one more forlorn than the last. The house had clearly been neglected for years, its furniture draped in sheets like shrouds, its walls lined with faded portraits of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow me as I moved from room to room to room. I felt a strange, creeping sensation of being watched, a prickle at the back of my neck that made me glance over my shoulder more than once. Each time, I was greeted by nothing more than shadows and silence. As evening fell, the house grew colder, and I busied myself with lighting the old fireplace in the drawing room. The flames sputtered and crackled, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls like restless spirits. I settled into an armchair by the fire, the warmth a welcome respite from the chill that seemed to seep from the very bones of the house. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, the branches tapping against the windows in a rhythmic, almost deliberate pattern. I tried to relax, telling myself that the house was simply old, and that the unsettling atmosphere was nothing more than a product of its age and neglect. But as the hours passed, the sense of unease only deepened. The house seemed to groan and shift as if it were alive, responding to the changes in temperature and the weight of my presence. I could hear the faint creaking of floorboards above me, the sound distinct and deliberate, like slow, measured footsteps. My heart pounded as I strained to listen, my ears attuned to every noise. Surely it was just the house settling, I told myself. The structure was old, the sounds were nothing unusual. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was moving through the upper floors. Deciding to investigate, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the grand staircase, the beam of light cutting through the thick darkness that cloaked the upper landing. Each step echoed loudly in the stillness, the sound amplified by the vast emptiness of the house. I reached the top of the stairs and paused, listening intently. The creaking had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that hung heavy in the air. I moved cautiously down the hallway, my flashlight casting long shadows that leapt and twisted with every movement. As I reached the end of the hallway, I noticed a door slightly ajar. It was a room I hadn't explored earlier, its entrance hidden behind a large, ornate tapestry that depicted a hunting scene from centuries past. I pushed the door open, revealing a small study lined with bookshelves that sagged under the weight of dust-covered tomes. A large desk dominated the center of the room, its surface cluttered with yellowed papers, old maps, and a tarnished brass key that gleamed faintly in the flashlight's beam. I stepped into the room, the floorboards groaning under my weight. As I moved closer to the desk, I felt it again, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. It was as if 1,000 unseen eyes were fixed on me, their gaze piercing through the dim light and the veil of dust that hung in the air. I turned slowly, scanning the room with the flashlight, but there was nothing, only the stillness of the forgotten study and the oppressive silence that pressed in from all sides. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me with a resounding crash that reverberated through the walls. I jumped, my heart lurching into my throat as I whirled around, the flashlight flickering wildly in my trembling hand. I rushed to the door and pulled, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged as I rattled the handle, the old wood refusing to yield. I was trapped. In the midst of my struggle, I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible but unmistakably there. It was a voice, low and murmuring, as if speaking from a great distance. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, the words still indecipherable, but laced with a tone of urgency, or perhaps warning. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my ear against the door, straining to make out the words. It was like listening to the wind rustling through dry leaves, a constant, unintelligible murmur that filled the room with a chilling sense of presence. I fumbled for the key on the desk, my fingers shaking as I turned it over in my hand. It was old, its metal cool and heavy, engraved with strange symbols that I couldn't quite make out in the dim light. On a hunch, I inserted the key into the lock, the mechanism clicking with a rusty groan. The door swung open, and I stumbled out into the hallway, my heart racing. I made my way back down the stairs, the house seeming to close in around me with every step. The whispers faded, but the sense of being watched persisted, an unseen gaze that followed me from the shadows. I hurried to the drawing room, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what I had experienced. Had it been my imagination? The creaks of an old house playing tricks on my mind? Or was there something lurking in the forgotten corners of the manor, watching and waiting? The rest of the night passed in a blur of restless anxiety. I lay awake in one of the dusty old bedrooms, the bed creaking under my weight as I tossed and turned. Every sound, the soft rustle of leaves outside, the distant howl of the wind, the faint creaking of the house seemed magnified, feeding the growing sense of dread that gnawed at my thoughts. I felt like an intruder, as if the house resented my presence and was trying to drive me away. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't stay. Whatever secrets the house held, they were not meant for me. I packed my things hastily, eager to put as much distance between myself and the manor as possible. As I stepped outside, the morning light did little to dispel the lingering sense of unease. The house loomed behind me, its dark windows staring out like empty, soulless eyes. I locked the front door, the key cold and unyielding in my hand, and turned away without looking back. Driving away from the manor, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, the oppressive presence of the house still clinging to my thoughts like a shadow. It was as if the house had left a mark on me, a quiet reminder of its existence that would not be easily forgotten. I wondered what secrets lay hidden in its darkened rooms, what stories the whispers in the walls could tell if only they could be understood. In the weeks that followed, I tried to put the experience behind me, burying myself in work and the familiar routines of daily life. But the memory of the manor lingered, resurfacing in quiet moments and vivid dreams. I could still hear the soft, insistent whispers, feel the cold gaze of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. The house, with its silent rooms and hidden secrets, had imprinted itself on my mind, a haunting reminder of the thin veil that separates the known from the unknown. I never returned to the manor. It stood as a silent sentinel at the end of its winding road, a monument to the past and the mysteries it held. Though the whispers had faded, their echoes remained a testament to the unseen, the unknowable, and the quiet watchers that dwell in the forgotten corners of the world. And in the end, I realized that some places are best left undisturbed, their secrets kept safe within the walls that have seen centuries pass, their stories whispered only to those who dare to listen. He looked past me, his gaze shifting back to the sea, as if drawn by an invisible tether. His whispering resumed, the words spilling from his lips with an urgency that bordered on desperation. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but the tone was unmistakable, a fervent, almost reverential muttering that filled the air with an unsettling dissonance. The wind whipped around us, carrying his whispers into the void, merging with the distant cries of gulls and the relentless pounding of the surf. I tried again, stepping forward and reaching out a hand, but the man's focus was unwavering, locked on the turbulent waters below. His whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I caught a few disjointed phrases, fragments of something dark and incomprehensible, like a prayer spoken in a forgotten tongue. My skin prickled with a cold, creeping dread. It was as though the cliffs themselves were listening, the wind and waves answering his call with their own chaotic symphony. Suddenly, he took a step closer to the edge, his feet perilously close to the brink. I shouted, lunging forward to grab him, but he moved with a quickness that belied his previous stillness. In one fluid motion, he raised his arms and stepped off the cliff, disappearing over the edge before I could reach him. A strangled cry escaped my throat as I skidded to a halt, my heart hammering in my chest. I dropped to my knees, crawling to the edge and peering over, expecting to see him tumbling towards the rocks below. But there was nothing. The water churned and frothed far below, the waves crashing against the jagged stones, but the man was gone, swallowed by the sea without a trace. I scanned the waters frantically, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but all I could see were the relentless waves, indifferent to the life that had just vanished into their depths. My mind raced, grappling with the impossibility of what I had witnessed. How could he have disappeared so completely, so suddenly? I stumbled back from the edge, my thoughts a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. I retraced my steps along the path, looking for any sign of the man, but there was nothing, no footprints, no discarded belongings, nothing to suggest that he had ever been there. It was as if he had been a mirage, a fleeting shadow conjured by the wind and the sea. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking as I called the authorities, my voice faltering as I recounted the bizarre encounter. The search and rescue team arrived swiftly, their faces grim as they combed the area. They questioned me thoroughly, their expressions betraying a mix of skepticism and concern as I described the man and his final moments on the cliff. They searched the waters, their boat scouring the choppy waves for any sign of a body, but their efforts yielded nothing. After hours of fruitless searching, they concluded that the man, if he had ever existed, was gone, claimed by the unforgiving sea. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of his vacant eyes, the rhythmic whispers that had echoed in the wind. I returned to the cliffs, hoping to find some clue, some explanation that would make sense of what I had seen. But the cliffs remained as they always had, majestic, indifferent, and eerily silent. The wind blew, the waves crashed, and the sea stretched endlessly towards the horizon, offering no answers, no solace. I began to research, diving into old maritime legends and local folklore, seeking anything that might shed light on the strange encounter. I learned of ancient tale stories of spirits that lured sailors to their doom, of voices that called from the deep, beckoning the unwary towards the abyss. The more I read, the more I felt a connection between the man's whispers and the darker, hidden currents that ran beneath the surface of the sea. It was as if he had been drawn by something beyond comprehension, an ancient call that resonated with the primal depths of the ocean. The cliffs, once a place of solace, now held a different meaning for me. They were no longer just a scenic overlook, but a boundary between worlds, the known and the unknown, the living and the lost. I continued to visit, compelled by a morbid curiosity, a need to understand the pull that had claimed the man. I stood at the edge, feeling the wind tug at my clothes, the sea's roar filling my ears like a distant, endless chant. Though I never saw the man again, his presence lingered an invisible weight that pressed against the senses, a reminder of the fragile line between safety and surrender. The cliffs, with their stark beauty and relentless power, had shown me a glimpse of something beyond the ordinary, a force that defied explanation, that called to the deepest fears and fascinations of the human soul. And though I resisted the call, the memory of that day remained a haunting echo, a quiet whisper in the wind that reminded me of the mysteries that lie just beyond the edge. Perhaps the man had found what he was looking for in the depths of the sea, or perhaps he had been lost to something far darker. Whatever the truth, the cliffs of Dover would forever be a place of unanswered questions, a reminder of the thin line between the world we know and the abyss that lies beyond, waiting to be explored, feared, or perhaps, in some cases, embraced. Story 11: The Mirror in the Attic. The house was old, much older than any I had ever lived in before. It was a Victorian relic, tucked away in a quiet corner of a town that prided itself on its historical roots. My parents had purchased it with the intention of restoring it to its former glory, a daunting task, given the house's state of disrepair. Its once elegant facade was marred by peeling paint, and the expansive windows, with their ornate, weather-worn frames, stared vacantly at the overgrown garden. Still, there was a charm to the house, a sense of history that seemed to whisper from its creaking floorboards and shadowed hallways. I had always been drawn to old houses, fascinated by the stories they held within their walls, and this one was no exception. From the moment we moved in, I felt an inexplicable connection to the house, as if it had been waiting for us to arrive. I spent hours exploring every nook and cranny, uncovering forgotten relics of the past, a tarnished doorknob here, a faded photograph there, each item a piece of a larger, unseen puzzle. The attic, in particular, held a strange allure. It was a vast, dimly lit space filled with discarded furniture, dusty trunks, and cobwebs that hung like delicate lace from the rafters. Despite its neglected state, the attic had a certain magnetism, an aura that drew me back time and again, as if it held some secret that was just beyond my grasp. One afternoon, while rummaging through a pile of old crates, I stumbled upon a large, ornate mirror propped against the far wall. It was unlike any I had ever seen. Its frame was carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the dim light, giving the impression of movement just beyond the edge of perception. The glass was cloudy and speckled with age, yet it held a strange, almost hypnotic allure. I reached out, brushing my fingers against the cold surface, and a shiver ran through me, as if the mirror had recognized my touch. I dragged the mirror into the center of the attic, wiping away the dust to get a better look. There was something captivating about the way the light played off the glass, catching at odd angles and casting distorted reflections that twisted and warped my own image. As I gazed into the mirror, I felt a peculiar sensation, a gentle pull, as though the mirror were drawing me in, inviting me to step closer and peer deeper into its depths. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself spending more and more time in the attic, captivated by the mirror and the strange reflections it offered. At first, it was little more than a curiosity, a distraction from the monotony of unpacking and settling into our new home. But gradually, I began to notice things small, subtle changes that set my nerves on edge. Shadows that shifted when they shouldn't, reflections that lingered a moment too long, as if the mirror were showing me more than just my own image. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the attic was bathed in a soft, amber glow, I decided to take a closer look. I stood before the mirror, my reflection staring back at me with a clarity that seemed sharper, more defined than usual. There was something off about the way my eyes looked wider, more intense, as if they held secrets I wasn't meant to know. I leaned in closer, my breath fogging the glass, and that's when I saw a flicker of movement, just behind my reflection. I spun around, heart racing, but the attic was empty. I turned back to the mirror, my pulse thundering in my ears, and there it was again, a shadow, faint and indistinct, moving just at the periphery of the glass. I stared, transfixed, as the shadow grew clearer, taking on the vague outline of a figure, a person, tall and slender, standing just behind me. Panic surged through me, and I whirled around once more, only to be met with the same empty attic, the same silent, dust-covered space. Fear clutched at my chest as I backed away from the mirror, my mind reeling with questions. What had I seen? Was it a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination, or was there something more, something lurking within the mirror's depths, watching me from the other side? I fled the attic, slamming the door behind me and vowing not to return. But the image of the shadowy figure stayed with me, haunting my thoughts and invading my dreams. That night, I lay awake, the house creaking softly around me as I replayed the events in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was more than it seemed, that it held a hidden depth, a layer of reality that lay just beyond the reach of ordinary sight. I told myself it was nonsense, the product of an overactive imagination fueled by the eerie atmosphere of the old house. But deep down, a part of me knew that what I had seen was real, that the mirror had shown me a glimpse of something beyond my understanding. Unable to resist, I returned to the attic the next day, determined to confront the mirror and prove to myself that it was nothing more than an old piece of glass and wood. I stood before it, my reflection staring back with an expression that mirrored my own unease. I watched closely, waiting for the shadow to appear, but the mirror remained stubbornly ordinary, reflecting only the cluttered space of the attic and my own wary gaze. Just as I was about to turn away, I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker, so brief it was almost imperceptible. I turned back, my breath catching in my throat as I saw it again, the shadow, faint and elusive, shifting at the edge of the glass. It moved closer, taking on a more defined shape, and I realized with growing horror that it was not just a shadow, but a reflection, one that did not belong to me. I watched, frozen, As the figure stepped into view, its features becoming clearer with each passing second. It was a woman, dressed in clothes that seemed to belong to another era, a long, flowing dress that brushed the floor, her hair pinned up in an elaborate style that spoke of a time long past. She stared at me through the glass, her eyes wide and unblinking, and I felt a cold dread settle over me as I realized she was not a reflection, but something else, something trapped within the mirror, watching me from the other side. I backed away, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The woman's gaze followed me, her eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to reach out from the glass, pulling at my thoughts, my emotions. I could feel her presence, a palpable weight that pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. It was as if the mirror had become a window into another world, a realm where this woman was imprisoned, bound to the glass by forces I could not comprehend. I fled the attic, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence of the house. I locked the door behind me, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the key. I wanted to tell my parents, to share what I had seen, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain something so impossible, so terrifying? I knew they would dismiss it as a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination, and perhaps that's what it was. But the fear that gripped me was real, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror held a dark secret, one that I was not meant to uncover. Over the next few days, I avoided the attic, focusing instead on helping my parents with the endless tasks of renovation. But the mirror lingered in my thoughts, a constant, gnawing presence at the back of my mind. I found myself glancing at every reflective surface, half expecting to see the shadowy figure watching me from the other side. Each time, I was met with nothing but my own reflection, yet the unease remained, a quiet whisper that warned me to stay away. It wasn't until a week later, when I overheard my parents discussing the history of the house, that I finally began to piece together the mystery of the mirror. They had found an old journal in the library, hidden away behind a false panel in the wall. The journal belonged to a woman named Eleanor, who had lived in the house over a century ago. According to the entries, Eleanor had become obsessed with the mirror, convinced that it held a doorway to another world. She spent hours each day staring into the glass, searching for glimpses of the life she believed existed on the other side. The final entries in the journal were frantic, filled with disjointed ramblings and cryptic references to the other, a shadowy figure that Eleanor claimed had appeared in the mirror, watching her with eyes that mirrored her own. She wrote of feeling trapped, as if the mirror were pulling her in, drawing her closer to the edge of something she couldn't escape. The last entry was a single sentence, scrawled in shaky handwriting. It's here. I can't look away. The journal ended abruptly, with no explanation of what had become of Eleanor. My parents dismissed it as the ravings of a woman driven mad by isolation, but I knew better. I had seen the shadow, felt its presence, and I understood the pull that had consumed Eleanor. The mirror was not just a piece of furniture, it was a gateway, a thin barrier between worlds that should never have been breached. Convinced my parents to let me store the mirror in the basement, far from the attic and the curious gaze of anyone who might be drawn to its depths. I covered it with a heavy cloth, sealing it away from sight, and I hoped that would be enough to contain whatever lurked within. But even now, I can still feel its pull, a quiet, insistent tug at the edge of my consciousness, reminding me that some secrets are better left hidden, some reflections best left unseen. The house, with its creaking floors and shadowed hallways, never felt the same after that. It remained a place of mystery, a labyrinth of forgotten memories and half-whispered stories. And the mirror, though hidden, was always there, a silent watcher, waiting for someone to look into its depths and see what lay beyond. Story 12: The Forgotten Hospital. The old hospital loomed at the edge of town, a decaying monument to a past that everyone seemed eager to forget. Its once proud facade, now marred by years of neglect and the relentless advance of nature, stood as a stark reminder of the building's long-abandoned purpose. The windows, shattered and boarded up, stared out like empty eye sockets, and the surrounding grounds were overgrown with weeds and ivy, reclaiming the land with quiet determination. I had driven past it countless times, each glance filled with a mix of curiosity and unease. It wasn't until that gray October afternoon, with the sky heavy and brooding, that I finally gave in to the urge to explore its darkened halls. I had always been drawn to places like this, forgotten structures that held the echoes of lives once lived, now shrouded in dust and silence. There was something undeniably magnetic about the hospital, a pull that I couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was the stories I had heard, rumors of strange occurrences, whispered tales of restless spirits that wandered the corridors, seeking something they had lost. Or perhaps it was simply the allure of the unknown, the thrill of venturing into a space where few dared to tread. Armed with a flashlight and my camera, I approached the rusting gates, which groaned in protest as I pushed them open. The grounds were eerily quiet, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Fallen leaves crunched underfoot as I made my way to the main entrance, the heavy wooden doors hanging ajar, their once polished surfaces now splintered and faded. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Then, with a deep breath, I stepped inside. The lobby was a vast, echoing chamber, filled with shadows and the faint scent of mildew. The floor was littered with debris, broken tiles, fragments of furniture, and the scattered remnants of patient files that had long since been abandoned to the elements. I swept my flashlight across the room, the beam cutting through the thick dust that hung in the air like a fine mist. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and old signs dangled precariously from their mounts, their faded letters barely legible in the dim light. I moved slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that coated the floor. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling and the distant drip of water seeping through the cracked ceilings. I paused at the reception desk, its surface buried under a thick layer of papers and grime. A faded calendar from decades past lay open, its pages yellowed and brittle, the dates frozen in time. The hospital had been abandoned abruptly, it seemed, as if the life within its walls had been snuffed out all at once, leaving behind only the remnants of a world that no longer existed. I continued down the main corridor, the flashlight beam revealing glimpses of examination rooms, their doors hanging askew on rusted hinges. Each room was a snapshot of decay-rusted beds, shattered equipment, and cabinets filled with ancient, dust-coated medical supplies. The farther I ventured, the stronger the sense of unease became, as if the very walls were watching, waiting for something. It wasn't long before I came across the first of the strange graffiti that had been scrawled across the peeling walls, messages written in jagged, frantic strokes, their meanings obscure and unsettling. They never left one read, the words smeared and uneven, as if the writer had been in a hurry. Another, painted in bold red letters, declared, "Listen closely." I felt a chill run through me as I read the words, the sensation of being watched intensifying with each step I took. It was as though the hospital itself were alive, its corridors pulsating with a quiet, malevolent energy that set my nerves on edge. As I made my way deeper into the building, I found myself drawn towards the old surgical wing, its double doors marked with the faded red cross of a bygone era. The air grew colder as I approached, the temperature dropping noticeably as I pushed the doors open. The operating rooms lay in disarray, their once sterile environments now reduced to scenes of utter disrepair. Surgical lights hung from the ceiling like dead, mechanical spiders, their bulbs long burned out. Rusting tables, still covered with the faint stains of their last uses, stood at odd angles, surrounded by an assortment of decaying instruments that clattered softly underfoot. It was there, in the heart of the surgical wing, that I first heard the noise of faint, rhythmic tapping that echoed faintly through the corridors. I stopped, holding my breath as I listened. It was distant at first, almost imperceptible, like the sound of dripping water or the soft rustle of fabric. But as I moved closer, the noise grew louder, more distinct, taking on a steady cadence that sent a shiver down my spine. It was deliberate, purposeful, as if someone or something was methodically moving through the hospital, their footsteps echoing off the walls in a haunting refrain. I followed the sound, my flashlight beam jittering as my hands trembled with a mix of fear and anticipation. The tapping led me down a narrow hallway, past a row of patient rooms whose doors stood open like silent sentinels. I could feel the air grow heavier, charged with a tension that made it hard to breathe. The noise grew louder still, the rhythm steady and unchanging, leading me deeper into the bowels of the hospital. At the end of the hallway, I found a door that stood slightly ajar, the tapping emanating from within. My heart pounded as I approached, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to leave this place and never return. But I was compelled by something stronger and need to understand, to see what lay behind that door. I pushed it open, my flashlight cutting through the darkness to reveal a small room, empty save for a single wheelchair that sat in the center. The chair was old, its metal frame rusted and its seat frayed and stained. It rocked gently back and forth, its wheels creaking with each movement, as if propelled by an unseen force. I stared, transfixed, as the tapping continued a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was then that I noticed the walls. They were covered in more graffiti, the words overlapping in a chaotic jumble that seemed to pulse and writhe in the dim light. Help Maine, one phrase repeated over and over, the letters large and desperate. It never ends, another declared, its letters jagged and uneven. I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the room as the tapping grew louder, more insistent. It filled my ears, drowning out the sound of my own heartbeat, the very air around me vibrating with the force of it. I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread, as if the walls were closing in, the room shrinking around me. The tapping rose to a deafening crescendo, and in that moment, I understood I was not alone. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering wildly as I turned and fled the room. The tapping followed me, echoing through the corridors as I sprinted down the hallway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could feel it behind me, that presence, that weight pressing closer with each step, reaching out with invisible fingers that clawed at my thoughts. I tore through the lobby, barely pausing to push open the heavy doors, and burst out into the cool, damp air of the evening. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing on the overgrown lawn as I struggled to catch my breath. The hospital loomed behind me, silent and unyielding, its darkened windows staring out into the night. The tapping had stopped, but the memory of it lingered, a haunting echo that reverberated in my mind. I knew in that moment that whatever had happened in that room, whatever had left its mark on the walls, had never truly left. The hospital was a tomb, not just for the bodies of those who had died within its walls, but for the echoes of their suffering, trapped in a loop of unending despair. I never returned to the hospital after that day. The stories of its haunting had always seemed like little more than urban legends, exaggerated tales passed down through the years. But now I understood the truth that some places are more than just buildings, more than just the sum of their walls and rooms. They are repositories of memory, of pain, of lives cut short and voices silenced. And sometimes those voices linger, unable or unwilling to move on. The old hospital still stands at the edge of town, a forgotten relic that few dare to approach. Its halls remain silent, its rooms untouched, save for the occasional thrill seeker or curious soul drawn in by the allure of the unknown. But I know better. I know that the hospital is not truly empty, that the tapping still echoes through its corridors, that the graffiti on the walls still cries out for help. It is a place where the past refuses to die, where the echoes of the lost continue to speak in the language of shadows and whispers. And so, I avoid the road that leads past the hospital, turning my gaze away whenever I catch sight of its looming silhouette. I carry the memory of that day with me, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead, and of the places where that veil is worn thin, where the echoes of the past are never truly silent. The hospital remains, a testament to the persistence of memory and the weight of forgotten lives. And somewhere in its darkened halls, the tapping continues a quiet, unending call from the other side.